perfect light of love, O Lord, the gracious light to man. Come open wide my darkened mind, and dwell therein again. O save me from my sinfulness, and send me forth, I pray, to light the pathway of the night for all who walk this way. Thou perfect light of love, dear Lord, the gracious light to man, come enter thou my weary heart, and help me live again.
As you celebrate your 175th anniversary, I hope that your memories of First Presbyterian's great cloud of witnesses will inspire you and give you the courage and perseverance to continue to run the race that is set before you. Hebrews 12:1. Thank you.
At least 52 years.
We've been a member officially almost a year.
62 years.
I have been a member for 6 years now.
Well, I've been a member since 1986.
October of 99, which is when Glenna was baptized.
I was confirmed when I was 17 years old, but I was brought to the church in 1938.
I have been members of this church since 1985.
I've been a member since 1988.
30 years, I believe.
Well, I joined after the communicants class, and I probably was in 9th grade at that point. But I've been here ever since I was 2 years old.
Since I was born, or since I was confirmed in 1950.
I was a member of First Presbyterian Church from 1979 until my wife Ellen and I moved to Baltimore in 2018.
My wife and son came to town one day and went through the old library across the street, which is now the Art Museum. And they looked through the windows and saw this church and thought that they might want to just go and see what it was about. And they ran into Nan DeVries. She had this smile that just lit up a room. She grabbed my wife and son and hugged them and took them on a tour of the place and told our son all about what was going on with the youth program, and pretty well welcomed us right into church right away. I think she was probably the reason we joined the church, is that it just made us feel so welcome.
Actually, Art Native Potrats were our neighbors, and we were looking for a church for our son, and they recommended this one, and so Wally became a member down here also, and participated in the youth programs all the way through high school.
And I was attracted to it. I really enjoyed the sermons from Cal and Nan DeVries. And then when I met Mary and we got ready to get married, it just seemed like the perfect place to be, and she enjoyed the church as well.
Yeah, I met Larry Hayward and liked him right away and felt very at home.
Well, since I was brought there as a baby, I wanted to go there. Friends Keith Rusher, whose mother Billy played the piano here, Tim Evans, and others went to this church, so we came here. My dad was a Catholic, older boy, and I don't believe in the middleman, so I wanted to be a Presbyterian.
My grandparents were the Penningroths, my parents were the Hulls, my aunt and uncle were the Pences, and we all came to church every Sunday. It's just what I knew from the time I was little.
My parents were members. When we moved from Winnetka in 1958, they looked around at other churches. I'm not quite sure why they picked First Presbyterian Church. I guess it was the people that made them think about First Presbyterian.
Came to Cedar Rapids in 1978 to join the faculty of Coe College. I was eager to find a church home. I began by asking two of my new colleagues, David Hay, a professor of religion who was also the college's chaplain at the time, and Fred Wilhoit, a professor of political science, if there were churches in the area that they would recommend. Both of them strongly encouraged me to visit First Presbyterian, where they were active members. Thankfully, I took their advice.
Then my dad started coming. They joined the church. They were very, very active in all kinds of activities. You know, they taught Sunday school. It was kind of a SEMP program then too. My mother was in guilds. She was in a prayer group. And so, you know, I grew up here. I was confirmed. And then Steve and I were married here. Our kids were both baptized here.
6 generations of my family have attended this church. It never occurred to me that maybe I should look around.
What made us decide to join was not Bill and myself, but it was our son Matthew. So we decided to come down here, and at that time Bob David was the youth director, and he invited Matt to come to a youth service on Wednesday night. Matt fell in love with it, and he said that's where we need to go to church. And the next week we started here at First Pres and have been here ever since.
Well, I had been attending a different church, and when I made the decision to leave that church, I had lots of friends and people I knew who had also come over here, and so I gave it a try and immediately loved it.
So we started virtually attending during the pandemic in 2020. We actually were looking for a community of faith, and our friends, the Kaismans, came here, and we knew that we were similarly minded people, so we had talked to them about the church and thought that it might be a good fit.
And my favorite holiday was Christmas. It was always beautiful. I like Easter too. I just think, you know, the church was always decorated, and it was just, I don't know, I just love Christmas anyway, you know, but it was just thinking about Christ's birth and everything. That's why I really like that.
Remember last year when we had the choirs from the different high schools that came and did the concerts? That was so nice.
My favorite season is actually summer because it's much more informal. I'm a big fan of informality. I like the summer program. I like the wide variety of music we get.
I really love the Ash Wednesday services, and they're so unique and the way that they're done, and I really appreciate that. It's very thoughtful. There are stations that you go to, and it's very introspective, and it feels very personal, and I really like that.
Christmas is mine. From when the girls were little, and the pageants, and Doris Courtwright and I always helped Greg Smith when he did the pageants. We helped the kids at the pulpits with their readings. That was always very fun. I still remember Molly Burrish, and I tell her this, that she used to be this little girl that didn't want to stand on the risers, and she'd come over to me by the pulpit, and she would just stand there behind it, and we'd hold hands and we'd look out. And now Molly's just about as tall as I am. The Star Tree. I've enjoyed the Star Tree. It's been 20 or 21 years since we started doing the Star Tree, and I continue to enjoy how generous our church is, and helping currently the foundation too, and the kids that have aged out of foster care.
Yeah, I like Christmas time too. I especially was fond of the times that as a family we would go up and we would light the Advent candles, and everybody would have a little speaking part, and the girls really enjoyed that. I was just so proud of them. They did just such a nice job, and so it was just a wonderful thing as a family to enjoy that
Yeah. And then
part of it.
also and then Easter. I mean, for your girls to grow up in a church that has that kind of a tradition, you know, of Easter egg hunts, and we used to do them in Green Square Park, you know, and then running around there, and then the confetti eggs.
Well, obviously Christmas and Easter, especially Christmas Eve candlelight service, we never miss. Seeing all the Easter lilies, that's wonderful too.
Is that we really enjoy the Christmas Eve celebration, the one that's late at night on Christmas Eve, where the lights go out and all of us leave the church and go out into the night. That has always made such an impression on me.
I like Easter because I like the way that they plan for it, and I just like the Easter Sunday service. In years past, they had the sunrise service that was in Green Square Park, and just different things like that we participated in since we've been with the church.
My favorite season, of course, is Christmas, because I'm a Christmas nut, as everybody knows around here. But our most important season is Easter. Bill and I always felt that was the most important holiday of all of the Christian holidays that we celebrate, because it's a renewal of our faith, and that's how we took it. It was more important to us than Christmas and, you know, all the hoopla that goes with it. Easter was a time where we could reconnect with each other and reconnect why Christ died on the cross for us.
As a child, it was Christmas. One year it had not snowed in Cedar Rapids before Christmas. As we walked out of Christmas Eve services at midnight, through the wooden doors onto 5th Street, the church bells were ringing and it was snowing, one of those beautiful sparkly snows that falls down slowly from the sky. It was magical. As an adult, I would say Lent and Easter are my favorites.
Been a deacon, been a long member of worship and music, been on the building task force, adult education, SEMP. When it was first starting, I was on the SEMP committee. Lenten small groups, food group, book club. Currently on the endowment committee.
I teach Sunday school. I'm an educator, and so I feel strongly about teaching kids. I love kids, and I think that there's an opportunity in Sunday school to help raise good people.
Too, I taught Sunday school, and that's when I met my friend Jackie Harrington. She was a wonderful, wonderful person. And I was on session, and then I helped with Sunday evening meals.
So I currently am on the Board of Deacons, and I am on the Proclamation Commission. I also volunteer doing food bank hospitality, so passing out coffee and snacks and hot cocoa to people, and that's been a really neat experience. I also have joined the Lenten small groups 2 years in a row, and I really have enjoyed those as well.
By Margaret Schneider, right away when we joined, for children's ed, because Glenna being young and in the nursery and then ready to go on to the nursery school rooms. So she got me and pretty much never let go. I was on children's ed myself and Doris Courtright long after our kids were done. Now doing the archives. Just started that in the last year or so. I just love it. I just can't believe I can go back and see handwritten books and notes from 1847 and up. I am just absolutely amazed that I have access to them, I can see them, I can read them, and I'm fascinated all the time. Just ask any of my family. I talk a lot about the archives.
I enjoyed I get started in the fellowship committee some years ago, and it pretty much had a lot to do with playing golf, because we always had an annual golf outing, and I wanted to be a part of that and other things, and so that was just a natural for me. So I started with the fellowship committee, and then I was asked to join the deacons and did that for a while. Really enjoyed that too, seeing people who aren't able to get here as much, the people that are getting older, and made some wonderful relationships with some of the older people, especially in particular Rod Strang. We had so much fun seeing each other, on probably a every other week basis at least, and he was such a character. But just going around and visiting people and making their days, that was always pretty special to me.
I was asked to be a deacon in 2012, and that was my first involvement really with the church. And that I thoroughly enjoyed that. I got to meet a lot of the members that I hadn't before, and it was just a pleasure just working with all these people.
When I came to First Pres, I was already an ordained deacon, and my ultimate goal was to become an ordained elder. Bill was already an ordained elder, and then when we got here, I became an ordained elder and he became an ordained deacon. So I've served on the session. I've served on the deacons multiple times. I was a wedding coordinator for 22 years. I was in charge of decorating the church for multiple years until I retired, and then just newly came back into taking care of Christmas again. I've served on many other various small committees within the church. Property committee, I was on that when we did the restoration of the sanctuary, the last restoration.
I have been on deacons, session, Christian Ed, was secretary of the women's group. I was the financial committee chair. I taught Sunday school. I've done just about everything.
I was a Sunday school teacher and a deacon. I felt it was my responsibility as a member to participate. I now really enjoy working in the archives. We have so many treasures that we want to uncover, preserve, and display. Archives are interesting in that they call to you to read and examine everything, and that leads you down a path of no return, far afield from the original search. So actually staying focused and completing tasks takes an unusually long time, especially if you don't remember what you were searching for in the first place.
Let's talk about the church basement. We used to have a basketball court there. I sometimes brought guests from St. Wenceslaus and Iowa City to play, Catholics versus Presbyterian. It was a dangerous place. The rim was right on the wall. You could not drive straight in or risk broken bones.
One of my fondest memories of this church is right near the very beginning of our starting to attend here in the mid-1980s, was the organist, Eleanor Taylor, professional, that she would sit at the organ and she could see the congregation in a rear view mirror, and you'd see her looking at the congregation. And if people were talking, she'd sit there and look at you without saying a word and waiting for the congregation to stop talking before she would start to play.
I think mine is probably just everything that our girls have done, from being in the nursery to seeing them in the Mother's Day pageant and the Christmas pageant and everything, and see them. They can just talk in front of anybody. They're very relaxed. They're able to talk to people of all age ranges, and I just give that credit to First Presbyterian in making them feel very at home here.
One of the oldest memories I have of the church is Ken Kirby. Ken took us on a tour of the church one Sunday morning when we first started here. Took us through all of the different areas of the church so that we really got a feel for what First Presbyterian Church is all about. And he was so nice about that and so generous of his time that stuck with me as somebody who really honestly cared about people and was interested in people.
When I think back to my years at First Presbyterian Church, a single experience that stands out is the memorial service there for my daughter Joy, who died by suicide in 2017 at the age of 31. At that devastating and heartbreaking time, Pastor Heather Hayes was simply wonderful. She patiently helped us to plan the kind of service we wanted, and she preached an utterly honest, yet somehow comforting homily that showed a keen and empathetic understanding of the emotions that we and the other mourners were feeling. No sermon has ever hit me where I lived and made me feel that I had been ministered to so directly and so well as much as that sermon did. As the service was about to begin, Heather told me that one of her daughters had just become very seriously ill, which made Heather's powerful and focused performance seem even more remarkable. And the congregation and community were just as gracious, with nearly 400 people coming to the service, many of whom hardly knew Joy, and many others whom I did not know, but who knew and loved Joy, and without judgment, stigma, or shame being directed at me or my family. It is a day I will not forget, when the church tenderly wrapped their arms around us in love and assured us that we were not alone in our grief.
PBS, I think 2021, I remember being at Green Square Park and just being such a fun time. And I remember the kids splashing and playing and talking about conservation, and it was so nice.
The oldest memory, if I really look back, is walking up the large flight of stairs from the arched walkway. Going up into the church was a large flight of stairs, and when I was little, my grandma would walk me up those stairs.
In the old building, we had to go outdoors to go from the Sunday school building to the church building. Old photos show the portico that connected the two buildings. It was like a wind tunnel. In the winter, it was not a pleasant walk. And then, at the end of the wind tunnel, were very steep stairs leading into the church building. But it was playing in the gym in the basement as children and teenagers.
Larry Hayward's first sermon, I believe, when he became our pastor, Hands Inside the Door, he preached that when we were interviewing him at another church. It still is in my memory.
I really like in Acts where the passage about Saul, where Saul starts out as somebody who was persecuting the Christians, and then God blinds him and God restores his sight, because I think that it's a really good illustration about how God can change people, and also how just the evolution that people can have in their lives kind of just speaks to me.
I do remember two preachers quite well. They were actually consecutive. Cal DeVries did some of the best sermons I've ever heard. Cal was a very intellectual preacher, and I like the intellectual stimulation of a good sermon, so I liked Cal's sermons. And then after he retired, John David Burton was our interim pastor for a couple of years before Larry Hayward arrived. And I remember John David Burton in particular because he was the person who taught us that it's okay to laugh in church. He could tell stories. Oh, man, he could tell stories. And his children's sermons were, I shouldn't say unique, but he was exceptionally good at giving a children's sermon that spoke to the adults in the congregation as well.
There are definitely sermons where I have left thinking, okay, was she following me around this week? She was talking straight to me. Has she been, right with me when I've been going through stuff? It's okay, she's looking and speaking right to me.
About the song Eleanor Rigby by the Beatles, and Nancy DeVries had a whole sermon built around the lyrics of that song, and she would speak a lyric or so, and then she would expand on it and how that related to our faith and things that were going on at the time. And that just, to me, it's a standalone for me. And
since Heather has been here, Heather has actually brought an energy to the church, and that's nice to see.
I would say that Larry Hayward, when we came here, was the minister. And there wasn't any one sermon in particular, but all of his sermons, when I left Sunday service, felt like he was talking directly to me.
Because I lived with our grandparents, and she had a lot of friends, and she had a lot of things that she belonged to. So a lot of her friends I remember well because children, and they just kind of watched over, that generation watched over everybody. So Mrs. Crumbles is one. Mrs. Winterberg used to come with the harpsichord and play in each of our classrooms every Sunday morning. Dr. Lilley was pretty good friends with my grandfather, and so he was at our house quite a bit, and I got to know him really, really well. First time I saw him, and I was 4 years old, and I kicked him in the shin. And of course my mom was just thrilled with that idea, but he was a good buddy, and we were just really good friends.
Dr. Lilley and Mrs. Lilley, Miss Pawnell, and Mrs. Winterberg, who played the piano for Sunday school. She sat at the upright piano on one of those little round piano stools with a top that spun to raise or lower the seat. She always wore a small hat with a little veil, and she was quite animated as she played, and we marched around the room singing "Onward, Christian Soldiers." As children, Dr. Lilley, with sleight of hand, used to pull quarters from behind our ears as we passed him in the hall or talked with him.
Martha Booth was Martha Walters, and she was a friend of mine then too. Frank Lackner was Tom's older brother, and so he was in youth group too. And
The person I fondly remember, and I just loved that man, was Don Ross. He just told it how it was. He was an intelligent individual. He did a lot of, he was very compassionate with me during Bill's cancer and after he died. The person that stands out the most that was in the administration of our congregation was Michael Puffett. He was a choir director, exuberant choir director. I mean, we could be singing and all of a sudden we do something right and he just let out a scream. And I said, you keep doing that, Michael, I'm going to have another heart attack, because it just freaked us all out.
I love and think it's really unique how inclusive First Presbyterian is, of kind of everybody of different orientations and different ethnic backgrounds. I just find it to be a very loving and accepting place.
I think the fact that we're still downtown. Several times when we've done major renovations, it's been proposed that maybe we should consider moving out of downtown Cedar Rapids. Well, as soon as you do that, the church is no longer the focal point. Church becomes a place you go on Sunday and not a place you pass every day. The staying downtown is an important and unique thing about us.
I just think the way that Heather interacts with the congregation and how the things that she preaches about and how thoughtful and thorough she is when she's giving her sermons is really neat, and I haven't always seen that at a lot of churches.
The most unique thing about this church is that they decided to stay where they're at, stay in the heart of the city, and not become a big box church out in the suburbs. Because this is where the work needs to be done, is in the heart of our city. And we show that by our Sunday evening meals program, the Lynn County Food Bank, all the organizations that use our facility, and people know that we're here to stay. And I think that's very unique for a church.
The fact that it's down here for 175 years, they decided we're going to stay down here, and we're one of very few churches that are still down here.
I think it's the well-rounded membership from every echelon of society. I like that idea.
Its position in the history of Cedar Rapids and the close connection with Coe College. Also the downtown location, especially being across from Green Square and adjacent to the library and the Museum of Art.
Mary and I we have made such great friends. Lifelong friends in this church, and I can't imagine life without these friends. I mean, they become some of our best friends in general. And so I would say the community, the camaraderie, and just the whole congregation as a whole. I mean, it doesn't matter if we're not all the same age. We relate to everybody relates to each other really, really well, and on a real basic level, and
just like my friendship with Heather, the staff, Joan and Stormy, Eric, Steve, Wally, everybody, that we've had here, they're friends. But, so when, you call and we're flooded again, we're here. It's that uniqueness, it's that bond, that, we're at that place in our life where, we'll be right there.
Oh, I think probably the programs that we do, particularly feeding people on Sunday night, the food bank, those two programs are probably, my way of thinking, are probably two of the best examples of what this church is about and what we do for our fellow man. Probably the prime reason I think that we're also involved in this church. I think that probably one of the things that stands out in my mind about this church is the way we have come through a flood, a derecho, a broken pipe. It just seems like any number of things that have happened to us as a congregation. It's just been amazing to see the resilience and the strength that this congregation has to deal with these issues and get right back up and get on our feet. I think that's one of the most important parts of who we are as First Presbyterian.
I'm going to mention the music again because I think that is such an important part of our life at First Pres. History, of course. Friendship, of course. Exceptional preaching, exceptional thoughtful preaching. The church is a family. We share things. We squabble. We fight. We get over it.
It's a place where I come and rewind. But it's a quiet time, and if I'm not focused on my spiritual during the week, that brings me back to where I need to be.
The community that you get with a church, and knowing that there are people there for you who care for you, and that's just really important.
Church is my rock and my salvation.
Church to me just kind of it's looked a lot of different ways. Like we started out a couple of years ago when we first started attending virtually. I remember having Easter on our laptop on our trampoline in our backyard, right? So church isn't necessarily the building or the place, but church to me is about just messages of God's love and Jesus's life, coupled with a community of really great people who are, like-minded and loving people.
When I was a deacon and on staff, I saw how important this church was to people and how they relied on it for so many different things, whether it's day-to-day trials in life or again, the big events. And seeing how important this church is to other people, it makes it important to me.
Well, first of all, we were married here almost 55 years ago. We consider church and church people our second home. Just being with them is uplifting. We've developed many close friends for years.
In a moving stewardship sermon that he preached in 1984, Cal DeVries reminded us of the magnificent array of momentous and cherished events that regularly occur in the life of the church. The church is a couple teaching a group of third graders Sunday morning after Sunday morning and finding something exciting happening to their own faith. It is the entrancing candlelight of a Christmas Eve in this sanctuary. It is the sound of a great pipe organ as we leave this place week after week. The church is laughter at a social event in a member's home. In the words of the Heidelberg Catechism, In life and in death, we belong to God, and I am deeply grateful to the wonderful people of First Presbyterian Church for being such a gracious embodiment of that affirmation.
The Presbyterian women had an event at First Presbyterian Church, which included many Iowa congregations. Eleanor had worked very hard to prepare her prelude of several selections. The pews were filled and people were talking as Eleanor walked to the console to start her prelude. Eleanor was not used to this, as our congregation were appreciative of her music and listened to her preludes. As she started playing, the talking grew louder. She added more stops so she could hear what she was playing. The chattering was quite loud. She wondered how to get the people to stop talking. She quit playing, turned around, placed her arms on the backrest of the organ bench, and glared, gazing back and forth. The chattering came to a silence, and they got her message. She finished her prelude to a silent audience. Over the years, Eleanor Taylor shared with me some humorous incidents that occurred before I knew her. I started taking organ lessons from Eleanor when I was a sophomore at Coe in the mid-50s. In my junior year, I began to serve as a substitute organist in local churches when an organist took a Sunday or two off. There was not an abundance of substitute organists, and I began getting more calls. When I was not playing at a service, I sang in the chancel choir. Eleanor stressed to always have music in front of you. Some responses, such as the Gloria Patri and the doxology, I would be playing every Sunday. Even though they're short pieces, it is possible to make a mistake. She said, "Let me show you what can happen." She said this happened to her a few months ago.
In 2016, after retiring, I became a staff member down here. And so that brings me to Eric Stark and working with him and the involvement with the community outreach and just how he planned the life events that people participated in this church. And that was just really important to have these set up, whether it was a wedding, memorial, or even a anniversary luncheon, anything like that. It was just a pleasure to be involved with him. And you know, again, it's just these are things that are important to these families and these church members, and it was just a pleasure to be a part of.
He was always the one that very much behind the scenes. He built rocket ships. He built the Ark for Bible School. He built all these mega structures. That's what he loved to do. So saving those airplanes, they said we had to save those airplanes, and they hung them in.
Some people will probably know this, but whenever I'd come into church, no matter when it would be, he would always call me Sarge. And I know a lot of people looked at me kind of inquisitively as if, why is he calling you Sarge all the time? So here's the story. As a bridal coordinator, I told people what to do and where to go. And we had a videographer for one wedding that insisted on standing on the pews. And I told him nicely, please do not do that. This is the sanctuary, we don't do that. Well, he came back and he said, well, I'm going to go down front. I said, no, you're not. This is a service, this is not a theatrical production. I said, if you wish to video, you can do it in the balcony. And after the wedding was over, he saw Eric and he said, do you know that bridal coordinator? And Eric said, yes, why? Was she in the military? She acted just like a sergeant. And that's how the name Sarge stuck with me, because Eric from that point on says Sarge.
Eric helped our family a lot when Glenna had cancer. If I needed something, a wheelchair, toilet riser, a walker, Eric was there.